Imagine yourself in 1890 on Birmingham's icy, grimy streets. The city is an industrial cauldron, a smoky, coal-stained hellscape. But then a figure emerges from the mist. Not a dirty laborer, nor a desolate beggar. This is an impeccably dressed man. A dark, bespoke wool suit, a stiff-collared shirt, a silk scarf cutting through the gloom, and crowning it all, a peaky cap pulled low, obscuring part of his face. You see him, and a shiver runs down your spine. Not from elegance, but from the deadly silence that accompanies him. Because beneath that style, defying the misery, lay a sharpened razor sewn into the cap's brim, and a promise of brutal violence for anyone crossing his path. They were the Peaky Blinders, young men who turned extortion, illegal betting, and street savagery into a dark art form, imposing their law where law seemed forgotten. They didn't just wear danger, they were danger. The real story behind this legendary gang is even more shocking, elegant, and bloody than any fiction could dare imagine. Ready to step into Birmingham's underworld? Stepping into late 19th century Birmingham was like walking into a Dickensian nightmare, only grittier. Imagine a city choked by factory smoke, its air thick with the smell of coal and desperation. This wasn't merely a backdrop for industry, it was a teeming, overcrowded labyrinth where human lives were chewed up and spat out by the relentless gears of progress. Thousands poured in from rural areas seeking work, only to find themselves crammed into squalid tenements. Clean water was a luxury, disease was rampant, and the average lifespan was, frankly, depressing. Children as young as 7 toiled in mills and workshops for pennies, their bodies twisted by endless hours of back-breaking labor. The police force, perpetually understaffed and overwhelmed, barely scratched the surface of the rampant crime. Law and order were concepts whispered in Westminster, but rarely seen in the back alleys of Small Heath or Aston. It was an environment ripe for chaos, where individual survival often meant bending or breaking every rule. Into this vacuum of legitimate authority stepped the slogging gangs. These weren't sophisticated criminal organizations, not yet. They were mostly groups of disaffected working-class youths, fueled by alcohol, boredom, and a profound lack of prospects. Violence became their currency, a means to assert control and earn respect. For young men facing a lifetime of monotonous factory work or grinding poverty, these gangs offered an intoxicating alternative, a sense of belonging, power, and perhaps a fleeting taste of notoriety. It was a brutal meritocracy where the toughest, the most cunning, and the most fearless rose to the top. The term Peaky Blinders itself is shrouded in a captivating haze of urban legend. One popular theory, dramatically captivating, suggests their name came from the sharp-brimmed caps they wore, which they allegedly used to blind opponents in fights by slashing them across the face with razors sewn into the brim. Another, perhaps less theatrical but equally plausible theory posits that peaky simply referred to their distinctive flat caps, a common working-class headwear of the time, often pulled low over the eyes. Blinder was a common colloquialism in Birmingham for someone who was strikingly stylish or exceptionally good at something. So, whether they literally blinded people or simply blinded them with their audacious style and terrifying prowess, the name stuck. It became synonymous with a specific brand of street gang, blending a sense of intimidating fashion with an undeniable visceral threat, setting them apart from the common sloggers. This blend of sartorial flair and raw savagery was their calling card, an almost cinematic paradox in a world obsessed with appearances and social hierarchy. They understood the power of a uniform, even if that uniform was designed not for order, but for chaos. It was a brilliant, albeit terrifying, marketing strategy. Before we dive deeper into their chilling reign and the brutal realities of their operations, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. You won't want to miss our next deep dive into history's most infamous gangs. Also, hit that like button and tell us in the comments what country and city you're watching from. The visual identity of the Peaky Blinders was nothing short of iconic, a bold statement amidst the industrial grime. They stood out, meticulously dressed in an era where most working-class men wore utilitarian, often threadbare clothing. Their look was sharp, tailored, and deliberately intimidating, creating a dramatic contrast. Picture this: custom-made tweed suits, often three-piece affairs, featuring tailored waistcoats and long jackets. Crisp white shirts with detachable collars, a symbol of upward aspiration, adorned their frames. Neckties were often silk, tied with a careful knot, adding a flash of color and refinement to their menacing ensemble. But the true signature piece, the crown jewel of their intimidating attire, was undeniably the Peaky cap. This working-class cap, pulled low over their eyes, cast them in perpetual shadow, adding an air of mystery and menace. It was both a fashion statement and, as legend has it, a concealed weapon. The contrast between this meticulously cultivated image and their savage criminality was, frankly, jarring. They moved through the impoverished streets like dark gentlemen, their polished leather boots clicking against the cobblestones, an unsettling elegance preceding their brutal intentions. It was a psychological weapon as potent as any blade. This deliberate choice of clothing wasn't about blending in, it was about standing out, about projecting power. In a rigid, class-conscious society, dressing like a gentleman while engaging in street brawls and extortion sent a clear message. We are above your rules, but we demand your respect. The legend of the razor blade sewn into the brim of their caps is perhaps the most enduring and controversial aspect of their mythology. Historians debate its absolute veracity, with some pointing out that single-use razor blades, as we know them, weren't widely available until the early 20th century. However, earlier, less refined forms of razors, or indeed sharpened objects like shards of glass or metal, could certainly have been concealed within the stiff brims of their caps. The psychological impact alone was immense. The mere belief that a Peaky Blinder carried such a weapon was enough to instill profound fear. Whether literal or symbolic, the razor in the cap became a powerful narrative, a terrifying badge of honor that solidified their fearsome reputation. It wasn't just about winning a fight. It was about disfiguring an opponent, marking them, and sending a brutal message to anyone else considering defiance. This blend of street smarts, brutal violence, and an almost theatrical sense of style made them utterly unique. They weren't just criminals. They were performers on a deadly stage, using every tool at their disposal, from a silk scarf to a potential razor, to command their audience of victims and rivals. Their fashion, therefore, wasn't merely about looking good, it was an integral part of their criminal enterprise, a public declaration of their power. It was the uniform of intimidation, a sartorial warning that whispered danger and promised a violent encounter if you dared to cross them. The Peaky Blinders' criminal empire wasn't built on grand schemes, but on the relentless grind of everyday terror and vice. Their bread and butter was good old-fashioned extortion, colloquially known as protection money. Shopkeepers, pub owners, and market stall holders paid a regular tribute to avoid having their businesses trashed or their faces rearranged. Refusal to pay was met with swift, brutal consequences. A broken window, a smashed-up stall, or a severe beating served as a stark lesson, ensuring compliance from a terrified populace. It was a simple, effective, and deeply cynical business model that thrived on fear and the police's inability to protect ordinary citizens. Beyond extortion, illegal gambling was a cornerstone of their operations, particularly horse racing. Betting dens, often hidden in the back rooms of pubs or in discreet warehouses, sprang up across their territories. They controlled the bookmakers, rigging races, intimidating jockeys, and ensuring a steady flow of illicit cash. These betting rackets weren't just about profit, they were about control. By dictating who could bet, where, and on what terms, they exerted influence over a popular pastime, further embedding themselves into the fabric of daily life in Birmingham's working-class neighborhoods. It was a significant power play. Their territorial control was ironclad, enforced with uncompromising violence. Street fights weren't just brawls, they were savage spectacles. Gang members would descend upon rivals or those who defied them with an arsenal of improvised weapons, belt buckles, boots, knives, and of course, the legendary Peaky caps. These confrontations were raw, vicious, and utterly devoid of any semblance of fair play. The goal wasn't just to win, it was to inflict maximum damage, to send an unmistakable message of dominance. Broken bones, shattered teeth, and disfigured faces were common outcomes, leaving a trail of suffering in their wake. They operated within specific neighborhoods, carving out their own small kingdoms where their word was law. Police patrols were often met with hostility or simply ignored, as the Peaky Blinders created a parallel state within the city, their authority eclipsing that of official institutions. This isn't to say there wasn't a strange, twisted code. Within their own ranks, there was a fierce loyalty, a brotherhood forged in the fires of deprivation and shared danger. But for anyone outside that circle, especially those who stood in their way, there was only ruthless, unfeeling aggression. They thrived on the chaos, manipulating the desperation of their environment to their advantage. Their very existence was a testament to the harsh realities of industrial England, where societal structures failed to provide, and brute force became the only path to power and sustenance. The legacy of their reign of terror lingered in the collective memory of Birmingham, a chilling reminder of a time when stylish thugs ruled the streets with an iron fist, turning the city's grim industrial landscape into their personal, brutal playground. One of the biggest misconceptions, largely fueled by popular television, is that the Peaky Blinders were a single, cohesive family unit like the fictional Shelbys. In reality, Peaky Blinders was a more generalized term, an umbrella referring to various often fluid street gangs operating across Birmingham at the turn of the century. Think of it less as a unified criminal syndicate and more as a style, a methodology, and a shared reputation adopted by numerous groups of young, working-class men. While they might share a similar modus operandi and aesthetic, they weren't necessarily under one single, charismatic leader. However, individual figures did rise to prominence within these gangs. Names like David Taylor, who was arrested in 1899 for carrying a loaded revolver, and Henry Lightfoot, jailed for housebreaking, appear in historical records as genuine Peaky Blinders. These were individuals who truly existed. Another notable name was Stephen McKickey, a younger member associated with the gang's activities. These weren't figures of grand, sweeping influence across a city-wide empire, but rather local toughs and leaders who commanded respect and fear within their immediate territories and criminal circles. The lives of these individuals were often short and brutal, marked by repeated arrests, prison sentences, and violent ends. They were not untouchable masterminds, but rather products of their environment, fighting tooth and nail for survival and dominance in a relentless urban jungle. Confrontations with rival gangs were commonplace and legendary. The streets of Birmingham frequently erupted into mass brawls, often involving dozens, sometimes hundreds, of men wielding bricks, belts, knives, and anything else they could get their hands on. These weren't duels, they were street-level warfare. The Cheapside Sloggers, or the Sellers Street Gang, were just some of the other local outfits that fiercely vied for control over territory, gambling rackets, and extortion routes. A slight, a territorial encroachment, or even a drunken insult could spark a citywide conflict, turning entire neighborhoods into battlegrounds. Imagine the sheer anarchy, rival factions clashing in broad daylight or under the cover of industrial fog, their cries echoing through narrow alleyways. These were not choreographed scenes of television drama, but raw, desperate fights for survival and reputation, with very real and bloody consequences. The police, often outnumbered and ill-equipped, struggled immensely to contain these outbreaks of violence. Their presence could sometimes quell a skirmish, but more often, it simply redirected the conflict or led to further confrontations, as the gangs viewed law enforcement as just another rival force. These historical accounts paint a far grittier, perhaps less glamorous picture than the glossy fiction, but they are no less compelling. They reveal the sheer desperation and the raw, unbridled brutality that defined the lives of the true Peaky Blinders and their rivals on Birmingham's unforgiving streets. The early 20th century marked a turning point for the original Peaky Blinders. Their era of fragmented street control began to wane, not just because of the relentless march of time, but largely due to increased efforts from law enforcement determined to reclaim the streets of Birmingham. Police strategies evolved. Special forces were created, dedicated solely to combating street gangs, employing more aggressive tactics and coordinating raids. The justice system, too, became less tolerant, handing down harsher sentences and making it increasingly difficult for gang members to operate with impunity. The sheer visibility of the Peaky Blinders' violent style, once their strength, became a weakness. They were easy to identify, making them targets for police crackdowns. This forced many of the original Peaky gangs to either dissolve, adapt, or face severe consequences, often ending in prison. Furthermore, the nature of crime itself began to change. The localized, often chaotic violence of the Peaky Blinders started to look outdated. More sophisticated, centralized criminal organizations began to emerge, understanding the power of anonymity and broader, more intricate networks. These new criminal enterprises were less about street brawls and territorial clashes, and more about systemic control of illegal markets, operating on a scale that dwarfed the original Peaky Blinders' localized operations. They were transitioning from street thugs to organized crime figures. This shift culminated in the rise of a new, formidable power, figures like Billy Kimber. Kimber wasn't just a leader of a Birmingham gang. He was the head of the Birmingham Gang, a far more expansive and influential criminal organization that quickly eclipsed the Peaky Blinders. Kimber's gang, often referred to as the Birmingham Boys, dominated the lucrative world of illegal racecourse betting across much of England, not just Birmingham. They maintained many of the Peaky Blinders' brutal methods, but applied them with vastly greater organization and geographical reach. While the Peaky Blinders were busy fighting for control over a few streets, Kimber was orchestrating a massive protection racket across racecourses, intimidating bookmakers and rival gangs alike. His power base extended far beyond Birmingham's immediate vicinity, reaching London and other major racing hubs. The original Peaky Blinders essentially became footnotes in the grander, more professionalized criminal landscape that Kimber and his ilk created. Their raw, unpolished violence gave way to a more calculated, systematic approach to crime, signaling the end of an era. So, while the name Peaky Blinders faded from the daily headlines, their legacy of brutal efficiency and stylish intimidation undeniably influenced the next generation of criminals, reshaping the underworld of early 20th century Britain into something far more vast and menacing. Despite their eventual decline, the reputation of the Peaky Blinders stubbornly persisted in the collective memory of Birmingham. Their stories, often embellished with each retelling, were passed down through generations, becoming a grim piece of local folklore, a cautionary tale of a brutal past. Grandparents would warn children about Peaky Blinders, invoking their name as a symbol of street justice and danger, even long after the original gangs had faded. This oral tradition kept their legend alive, painting them as both terrifying villains and, in some romanticized versions, local anti-heroes. Fast forward to the 21st century, and this local legend embarked on an unexpected journey to global stardom. The BBC series Peaky Blinders didn't just reinterpret the history, it resurrected it, transforming a localized legend into a worldwide cultural phenomenon that captured the imaginations of millions. The series, while taking considerable creative liberties and focusing on a fictionalized Shelby family, successfully bottled the essence of the historical gangs: the sharp suits, the brutal violence, the struggle for power, and the compelling paradox of elegant savagery. It brought the grim industrial landscape of Birmingham to life with stunning cinematography and a captivating narrative, introducing a new generation to a fascinating, albeit dark, chapter of British history. The show made Peaky Blinders a household name far beyond Birmingham's borders. The cultural impact has been immense. The distinctive Peaky Blinders aesthetic, the tailored suits, the slicked-back hair, the iconic caps, has inspired fashion trends, Halloween costumes, and themed bars worldwide. It's a testament to the power of their unique blend of style and menace. Beyond fashion, the show sparked a renewed interest in the social history of industrial Britain, prompting deeper explorations into the lives of working-class communities and the complex reasons behind the rise of such gangs. It highlighted the human element beneath the violence. The narrative of ambition, loyalty, and survival against overwhelming odds resonated deeply with audiences, transcending the specific historical context. It's a classic tale of the underdog, albeit a very violent one, fighting for their place in a world that seemingly wanted to crush them. Ultimately, the Peaky Blinders, whether the real historical figures or their fictional counterparts, have etched themselves into our collective consciousness. They represent a powerful, if uncomfortable, reminder of how desperation, when combined with ambition and ruthlessness, can forge a legacy that defies time. From the grimy streets of late Victorian Birmingham to the glossy screens of our living rooms, the legend of the Peaky Blinders continues to fascinate, proving that sometimes the most compelling stories are found lurking in the darkest corners of history. The Peaky Blinders weren't merely a gang, they were a social phenomenon. They embodied the brutal face of a relentless industrial era, where dignity was often stripped away and ambition was forged at the point of a razor. The image of the elegant gentleman concealing the soul of a violent predator is a paradox that continues to mesmerize and remind us of the thin line between civility and barbarity. Their story serves as a dark mirror reflecting human resilience and depravity, a chilling tale of how desperation can give rise to a life of crime and power. They carved out their niche in a world that offered little, demonstrating a perverse genius for survival and dominance in the most unforgiving circumstances. Ultimately, this gang, which terrorized Birmingham with both razors and style, left behind not just a trail of blood and illicit gains, but a legend that, even centuries later, still compels us to question: how far are humans willing to go to survive and assert control in a world that seems to have forgotten them? Thank you so much for watching this deep dive into the true story of the Peaky Blinders. We hope you found this journey into Birmingham's dark past as fascinating as we did. What aspect of their story surprised you the most, or what historical gang would you like us to explore next? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed uncovering the grim realities behind the legend, please hit that like button to support the channel. It genuinely helps us bring more untold stories from history's shadows to light, ensuring these captivating tales reach a wider audience. And don't forget to subscribe for more robust, detailed, and engaging historical narratives about the most infamous gangs of centuries past. Your support truly makes a difference. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the past with us.